Can Europe have a military power of its own? The war in Ukraine has pushed many countries in the continent to ramp up their defense spending. But is that enough to counter external threats? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has triggered policy shifts across Europe. Among them, a change in Germany's policy on military spending. For more than 30 years, the defense budget has been a low priority for German governments. But in the words of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Russia's actions in the continent marked a turning point in how his country views itself in Europe. In a historic shift, he committed to raising Germany's military spending to 2% of its GDP. That's more than $111 billion. Scholz also said Germany would supply Ukraine with lethal weapons, opening the door for many of its allies to do the same. Under military agreements, Germany has for years banned weapons it sold to its partners from being transferred into conflict zones.
Wir erleben eine Zeitenwende.
We are experiencing a turning point, and this means that the world after this is no longer the same as the world before it. In essence, it's a question of whether power can break right, whether we allow Putin to turn back the clocks to the time of the great powers of the 19th century, or whether we have the strength to set limits to warmongers like Putin. We will set up a special Bundeswehr fund for this purpose, and I am very grateful to the federal finance minister for his support on this. The 2022 federal budget will provide this special fund with a one-time sum of 100 billion euros, and we will use this fund for necessary investments and armament projects. From now on, year after year, we will invest more than 2% of the gross domestic product in our defense.
In times of peace, countries rarely allocate more than 5% of their gross domestic product on military spending. But when there's a war, that rises. Let's quickly take you through some comparisons for context. During the last year of the Second World War, the United States defense spending was about 40% of GDP. In 2020, it was less than 4%. The United Kingdom's military spending in peacetime fluctuates around 2.5%. At the height of the Second World War, the UK was spending around 53% of its GDP on its military. There's no clear data on how much France spent between 1940 and 45, though it's estimated to have been between 40 and 60%. France spent 2% in 2020. And Germany is estimated to have spent around 50% more than 7 decades ago. 2 years ago, it was 1.5%. For more on this, I'm joined by our guests. In Kharkiv, Ukraine, is Maria Avdeeva, specialist on EU-Ukraine relations and head of research for the European Expert Association. In London, Andreas Krieg, author and senior lecturer at the School of Security Studies in the Defence Studies Department at King's College. And joining us from Brussels, Teresa Fallon, director at the Centre for Russia-Europe-Asia Studies. Teresa is a former member of the advisors group NATO SACEUR. Well, thanks very much for joining us. So, Maria, if I could start with you, presumably this is welcome news in Kyiv that Germany, the biggest economy in Europe, is going to ramp up its defense spending. But I want to ask you as well, since you're talking to us from there, at the time of us recording this, there have been some large-scale attacks on Kharkiv. Hopefully you are safe, but I just wonder if you could talk to me about what the situation is there and what the atmosphere is like for people there.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me. Russia is shelling Kharkiv for 6 days already, and yesterday and today it was especially intense. So yesterday we have seen that Russian Grad rocket systems were used deliberately and targeted against residential areas in Kharkiv. And we have confirmed 12 civilians dead, and among them 2 children. One of the rockets got into the car where the family was at the moment, and the car completely burned out. So they were deliberately targeting residential areas, and the facilities for normal infrastructure like gas infrastructure, water infrastructure. That means that Putin sees that his blitzkrieg tactics didn't work as he probably was thinking about, and now he's taking the whole 1.5 million city as hostages and trying to blockade the city because people are, because of the constant shellings, completely locked to where they are. That's basements, shelters, metro. So they are sleeping there and standing there for the whole day and night. There is shortages of food supplies, water supplies, medical supplies, and it's not possible now to bring it to the city because of the constant challenge. And today was especially striking because at 8 a.m. in the morning, Russia launched rocket to the building, or to the main administrative building in Kharkiv, which is situated in the central square, and which was a symbolic place for Kharkiv because it's where our flag is and all the local government is situated there. So the building now is completely destroyed. The latest reports say that the 10 people are buried under what was left from the building, and the shelling continues. I myself had to move to corridor in my house because I have heard very close the sound of the aircrafts and the bombarders or other kind of aircrafts very close flying and bombing and shelling the residential areas in Kharkiv. So that's completely seen in Ukraine as an act of genocide against Ukrainian people, and Russia is committing right now a war crime. And we are really looking forward that this case in Hague will be followed very quickly, and that the Russian officials that are responsible for that will be known as the war criminals.
Andreas Krieg, how significant a shift is this for Germany?
For now, it's just a narrative, right? I mean, Germany has had it very difficult after the Cold War to actually define its raison d'etat. Where does it stand? Found actually very difficult to define its foreign and security policy post World War II, but obviously was quickly embedded into NATO and then really kind of followed the NATO lead because it was really the ground zero of the Cold War. But obviously, as the Iron Curtain came down and we had this expansion into Eastern Europe of the European Union, Germany never really defined what it actually stands for. It's a country that, for the most part, defines its foreign policy by, or conducts its foreign policy by, commercial interest and advancing commercial interests. Even the European Union has been a means for the industrial complex in Germany to advance its interests. But beyond that, in terms of values, in terms of actually geostrategic interest, Germany hasn't really defined who it actually is, and it has played a much smaller role in Europe and in the security architecture of Europe than its actual weight, economic weight in Europe. And now what we see is a new narrative emerging. For the first time, Germans are thinking about actually the entire policy towards Russia has failed, and they're now trying to rethink that. But for now, we need to be very careful here. I mean, the German government is a coalition government. The Chancellor has made a speech without actually talking to the various parties in the coalition and think about what it actually is that Germany wants to achieve. So for now, this is fairly hollow. And the problem of Germany, again, is not about how much money it's spending, because it has spent money, but it's how it's spending the money. And most importantly, how it defines itself. What is the raison d'etat? What does Germany stand for? And, that's what a strategy is all about. Strategy is about, first and foremost, defining your grand strategic narrative, defining your ends and your objectives before you actually then go and developing capability, which is something that Germany is lacking, obviously, as well.
Teresa Fallon, is this also the recognition of a new reality in Europe?
First of all, I just want to say I heard part of the last speaker's comments, so I hope I don't repeat anything he has said. And I also want to just salute Maria. I watch you on other networks, and I'm just amazed at your bravery. In regard to Europe, yes, Putin's moves in Ukraine have galvanized opinion across Europe. Germany is the largest country in Europe and the most powerful. And the fact that they have announced these changes, I think, is very, very important. Some have seen it as a little too late. If they had announced these sanctions and these actions, this could have prevented Putin's calculus for invading Ukraine, but we are where we are now. And I think that this is a very key moment. It's the first time in the history of the EU that they will actually fund weapons. This is a huge watershed moment. And I think that I heard an official yesterday at a conference state that the first time in 20 years, he feels proud of Europe's common security and defense policy known as CSDP. So that means in 20 years, he never felt proud of it until what happened now. So I think that we're seeing a tectonic change in Europe, which is very important. Germany, yes, it's good that they've agreed to this, but they agreed back in 2006 to meet 2% of their GDP and they haven't done it. So announcing that they're going to do that now, yes, give them a pat on the back, but they promised to do this since 2006. And I think that they have fallen into line because they see what is happening in the neighborhood and that they have no other option. So Putin has gotten far more than he expected, a more united Europe, more support for NATO, and a Germany which is no longer sitting on the fence. And if we zoom out a bit, this has much larger ramifications for Germany's relationship with China, therefore the rest of Europe, because Germany is the biggest trade partner of China in Europe. And they, since the February 4th signature of the Xi-Putin agreement, many have seen that as a non-aggression pact. And so we've seen Putin move troops from Russia's Far East after meeting with Xi Jinping in Beijing before the Olympics, and he's able to move troops towards Ukraine. He couldn't do that unless he had agreement from China. And in addition, they both wear the same kind of color suit, shirt and tie. They're coordinating far more in space and other areas. And in that agreement, it's a 5,000-word agreement, China said that they supported Russia's moves in regard to NATO, that they would also build a pipeline, and also there is a question mark over China. How will they act? Will they really help Russia? So the biggest loser in this is probably Russia, because they will be far more a junior partner to China than they ever dreamed of.
Maria Avdeeva, if Putin was trying to weaken and divide NATO, he's done the complete opposite now, hasn't he? Hasn't he strengthened and united Europe against him?
Absolutely. The strategy of Russia was aimed all the time to find vulnerabilities inside Europe and try to use them. And they were pretty successful in some countries doing that. And they used it for that disinformation a lot. And what he sees now, I think he didn't expect to see that Europe is now united, and he now says that the only means Russia has for now to threaten further is to use of nuclear weapons, because he said yesterday that he is putting the nuclear weapons system on high alert. And also this is a question that is discussed in Russian media, and that means that that is the only option and Putin now has to threaten further, because he sees that his strategy is not working, and the NATO countries and the alliance and Europe is more united than ever. And you probably know that President Zelensky made an appeal to EU for for Ukraine to be part of the European Union, and the process is, of course, will be not quick, but then it means a lot for Ukrainians, because what makes us more strong is that we see that we have support from all other countries across the world, and support both like in terms of general support to the people, but also support in weapons supplied, in fighter jet supply, in economic sanctions, harsh economic sanctions on Russia. Switzerland, which was always a neutral country, has sanctioned Putin, and the last time they did it was against Hitler during the World War II. So we see now that the world sees Putin and his regime as a threat to the whole world, and that means that he will be fighted. And my guess is that he will lose this game because he has actually not a lot to put on the table, and the protests inside Russia are growing because,
Okay, if I could turn to Andreas now, how much public support does this policy change have, not just in Germany but throughout Europe? I mean, we saw those protests in Berlin the day before. There does seem to be a certain amount of popular support for this, doesn't there?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a rallying moment. Across European capitals, we've seen definitely public expressions of solidarity with Ukraine, which is at least some source of hope that things might turn into the right direction. But we shouldn't be completely fooled. I mean, there are minority and fringe groups, minorities and fringe groups in Europe, within the European Union, that the previous speaker already alluded to, that have been courted by the Russians and have kind of taken a pro-Russian position. And many of those people in the cynical anti-Western camp, particularly anti-American, they call it American imperialist camp, are still in the camp of Russia, and they are not condemning Russia. So I think while the vast majority is very much on the streets to support Ukraine, the Russians have really invested for many, many decades, also in Germany, into groups on the far left and the far right to kind of take up the Russian cause and support Putin. And this kind of cynicism has, even in German parliament, and we've seen people within the left of the ruling Social Democratic Party and the left party as well, still taking a very, very strong pro-Putin standpoint. And obviously, most famously, Schröder, the former Chancellor of Germany, also a Social Democrat, is still serving on Russian energy companies' boards, and he's still a very close friend of Putin. So there is quite a lot that needs to be done. And I think there is also, that is something that worries me a little bit, because I think the left within this current German government is still not necessarily on board with that militaristic posture that Chancellor Scholz took in that speech. And I think a lot of discussion will still have to happen. And also that goes to the German public more widely. The German public more widely is pacifist, is anti-militarist. And for them to actually swallow not just 100 billion being spent, but then that's the more important question, then actually allowing the military to take a more proactive expeditionary position, I don't see that happening at the moment, because I think again, raison d'etat of Germany is post-World War II very much against war, against the use of hard power. And it will take some time for that to actually sink in and people to mobilize and saying, we want to take a more hard power stance. And let's not forget those people on the streets in Germany, in Berlin, in Cologne, over the last couple of days, they are protesting against war. That also means against rearmament, against the use of arms. And I think that will be an obstacle in Germany actually ever taking a more proactive position in the likes, or with the likes of France, the UK, or the United States.
Well, let's put some of that to Teresa then. Germany has historically been averse, hasn't it, to having a larger, stronger military? Is it the scars of World War II? And will, as Andreas suggests, will it take time for many in the German public to digest that?
Well, many analysts have noted that Angela Merkel, for example, would take advantage when the public opinion had shifted like this to really drive a new policy. And so that's what it appears to be happening. I mean, well, the proof is in the pudding, but I really think that this has been a galvanizing moment, because people are watching a war in their living rooms on their television screens, and they can't believe it was happening. So I think that people, as the German Free Democrat finance minister said, it's an investment in our own freedom, that they have to understand that they can no longer be so pacifist. There was a big debate, even, as everyone knows, they only sent 5,000 helmets to the poor Ukrainians, and that became a meme and a joke, and Germany felt rather humiliated by that. There were howitzers that were built in Eastern Germany, when Germany was divided, and because of rules and regulations, had been sent to Estonia. Estonia had to ask permission from Germany if they could send it to Ukraine, and they said no. That was kind of an easy no-brainer. They could have just let the Estonians send it. It had no money, had to change hands, nothing. But there was such strong disagreement on that. So I think the parameter has moved dramatically in Germany. And I think the public, we've seen the protests. And I think that this idea of, Russia's influence, carefully cultivated influence network, across Europe has crumbled. We've seen all of these former leaders who are on the boards of Russian companies. You know, there are articles in leading newspapers citing all of these German, Austrian, British leaders who are on Russia's payroll, and they have resigned from their positions. And as Andrea noted, former German Chancellor Schröder has not, so he's kind of a weird outlier, but he's been, you know, eating at the Russian trough for quite a long time now. And I think that this has the unintended consequence, you know, sunshine is the best for transparency. And this idea of Ostpolitik, this under Willy Brandt, this idea of Germany turning towards the East, trading more with Russia will make them more peaceful towards them. All of this has just been blown out of the water. So the fact that Germany is 55% reliant on Russian energy is unbelievable. I remember in the 80s when Ronald Reagan was warning Germany no more than 25, tops 30% dependence on Russian energy. So 55%, I don't care if your neighbor's Canada, you should diversify. You should not be reliant on any one country for that amount of energy. So I think there has to be a rethink. And this was also, Chancellor Scholz announced funding for 2 emergency LNG plants. These take a long time to build, but it means that liquefied natural gas plants will be built so that they will diversify their energy. So I think that Germany is really taking a massive change. When you look at, they wouldn't even allow some howitzers and they were only pledging helmets. So I think that, yes, it's a bit late, but it's a very promising change. And I think this is all part of the strategic narrative of Europe. They're coming up with their own strategic compass.
Maria Avdeeva, from where you sit, do you feel that Europe should have seen this coming?
Yes, I think that if Ukraine has been given the NATO membership in 2008, when Russia started war against Georgia, so now we will be discussing possibly different issues, you know, and that will not happen, Russia's aggression. So I think that so that was a big mistake, and but we are, as we have already said, where we are now, and no, before the invasion, actually, Ukraine asked for many times to already to put severe sanctions on Russia. But, you know, the countries of Europe were waiting until the Russia will actually invade. And now we have this, you know, war crimes here and the humanitarian crisis on the verge of beginning. So what I would also like to say is that what could stop Russia and what could also make the support and make the unity of the European countries greater is that actually now we are witnessing here the war crimes actually, because Russia is killing civilians by the weapons that are restricted, that are prohibited, because they used vacuum bombs in city Oktyrka in Sumsky region near Kharkiv. So meaning that is having that in mind, it might lead that the Russian officials won't be, don't want to be don't want to get into court as war criminals, and that probably they will somehow try to change the Putin's position on that and influence that, and that is why it is really important to now to give as much information to the world as possible to what actually is going on in Ukraine. Because what Putin wants to show, he is calling this special military operation, or sometimes it's referred in Western media as a Ukrainian crisis or Russian-Ukrainian conflict. It is not. It is a Russian war against a sovereign state. So that must be put clear. And whenever everyone is on this position and understand that Russia will not stop in Ukraine. Russia already has full control over the territory of Belarus because it is launching missiles and rockets from the territory of Belarus, and ballistic rockets as well yesterday were launched from there. And today we have information that Belarusian army is already on Ukrainian territory. Yeah, so I wanted to say that now they're really close to the Baltic states and to the Poland. So who will be next,
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much, all three of you, for talking to us. Maria Avdeeva in Kharkiv Andreas Krieg in London, and Teresa Fallon in Brussels. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you, as always, for watching. Remember, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.